We live in a really strange time, a real paradox. Most of our days are spent inside, in climate-controlled rooms, staring at screens. We're more cut off from the natural world than any humans in history. And yet, at the same time, we're more aware than ever that our entire way of life, our whole civilization, depends completely on a planetary system that's, well, starting to crack under the pressure. So this explainer is all about how we got here, how we developed this split personality.
Right, so how did we end up so disconnected? Because this feeling of being separate from nature, it isn't our default setting. It's not how we're wired. It's actually the result of a long, twisting history of ideas that have completely shaped how we see the world. So if we want to figure out how to heal this broken bond, we've got to first understand how it got broken in the first place.
And this slide, it just lays out the paradox perfectly, doesn't it? On the left, that's our world, this little bubble of technology, comfort, and a feeling of control. But on the right, that's the world, the raw reality that our bubble is totally dependent on these huge ecological systems that are showing some pretty scary signs of instability. Figuring out where that dangerous gap came from, well, that's what we're here to do.
Okay, so our journey is going to start way back, at the very beginning. We're going to look at how we went from seeing ourselves as just another part of a living world to believing we were its rightful masters. This was the first, and maybe the biggest, great separation.
For our earliest ancestors, the world was absolutely alive. This worldview is called animism. Think about it. A river wasn't just H2O. It had a spirit. A forest wasn't just a bunch of trees. It was a living community of beings. Nature wasn't a collection of its to be used and discarded, but a vast community of thous to be in a relationship with. And your survival literally depended on keeping that relationship respectful and reciprocal.
So, what changed? Well, this timeline shows the big turning points. It all really kicked off about 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution. For the very first time, we built literal walls, fences, between the human-controlled field and the so-called wilderness. And that physical boundary, it started to build a psychological one too. Suddenly, nature wasn't just our home anymore. It became this other thing that had to be managed and even defended against.
And then, philosophy came along and basically wrote this separation into law. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, he laid out this really clear hierarchy. He said plants exist for the sake of animals and animals for the sake of man. This idea, we call it anthropocentrism. It put humanity right at the tippy top, at the absolute center of everything. And with that, nature's value was no longer its own. It was defined purely by how useful it was to us.
The final move in this great separation was the scientific revolution. Thinkers like René Descartes came along and basically split the world in two. You had the thinking mind, which only humans possessed, and then there was just lifeless matter. Nature was totally reframed as this giant clockwork machine, a predictable, soulless system whose laws we could figure out so we could master it and, exploit it for our own progress.
But an idea that powerful, that cold and mechanical, it always creates a reaction. It just has to. This new view of the world left a huge spiritual hole, and a really powerful counter-movement rose up to challenge it, trying to put the magic and the meaning back into the natural world.
And that pushback was the Romantic movement. You had figures like Rousseau and Wordsworth who just passionately rejected industrialism. Their whole idea was that civilization was corrupting, and that real authenticity and spiritual connection could only be found out in nature. They celebrated what they called the sublime. That feeling of awe, maybe even a little bit of terror you get when you see a massive storm or stand at the edge of a huge mountain range. It was about being humbled by nature's power, not trying to control it.
Over in America, this idea evolved into transcendentalism. And Henry David Thoreau, well, he took this idea to its logical conclusion. This famous quote of his just completely flips the old script on its head. It's not that civilization needs to be protected from the wild, it's that wildness itself is what saves us, what preserves us from our own worst, most boring, conformist instincts.
Okay, so let's fast forward. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the consequences of treating nature like a simple machine were becoming impossible to ignore. The damage was starting to show. And this forced a new, much more pragmatic way of thinking, a shift away from pure philosophy and towards the science of actually managing and understanding our planet as a complex system.
In this slide, it captures the huge conflict that really defined the early environmental movement. You basically had two camps. On one side, Gifford Pinchot and the conservationists. They were all about wise use, scientifically managing resources for long-term human benefit.
But on the other side, you had John Muir and the preservationists, who argued that nature was a temple that had its own value, a right to exist, completely separate from whatever it could do for us.
Now, the thinker who really bridged this gap was a guy named Aldo Leopold. With his land ethic, he basically argued that it was time to expand our whole moral circle to include the entire ecological community, the soils, the waters, plants, animals, the whole shebang. He proposed this radical change in our role, from conqueror of the land to a plain member and citizen of it. I mean, that simple shift in one word from conqueror to citizen, it was absolutely revolutionary.
So if Leopold gave us the philosophy, Rachel Carson gave us the massive wake-up call. Her book Silent Spring showed the whole world how these invisible poisons, like DDT, didn't just stay where you put them. They moved through the entire food web. It made the abstract science of ecology suddenly personal and terrifying. It proved that something you do in one place could have devastating consequences everywhere else. This, right here, was the birth of the modern environmental movement as we know it.
And that brings us right up to today. We are now facing global crises that are forcing all of these different historical threads to come together. We're being pushed, really, to forge a completely new way of thinking, a new paradigm that moves beyond just sustaining what we have and towards actively regenerating our world.
Scientists actually have a name for our era, the Anthropocene. And it's because for the first time in Earth's history, a single species, us, humanity, is the biggest force shaping the entire planet. Things like climate change and global pollution have proven one thing beyond any doubt. There is no away. You can't throw things away anymore. The planet is a closed loop, and all of our actions are coming right back to us.
But at the exact same time, science is also starting to confirm what those romantic poets suspected all along. E.A. Wilson's biophilia hypothesis, it suggests that we have an innate biological need to connect with nature and other forms of life. This isn't just a preference, like liking a certain color. It's essential for our own psychological and physical health. So preserving nature is really about preserving ourselves.
And all of this is leading to some much-needed humility. We're finally starting to recognize that the Western story of domination, it's just one story among many. Indigenous cultures all around the world have often maintained a worldview of kinship and reciprocity for millennia. Their knowledge offers these powerful, time-tested models for how to live as a part of the world, not just on top of it.
So where does all this leave us? Well, it points to a new path forward, what we can call a regenerative paradigm. It's really a synthesis of everything we've just talked about. It's grounded in the hard-won ecological science of people like Leopold and Carson. It honors our deep psychological need for nature, as explained by the biophilia hypothesis. And it respects the wisdom of other cultures. It's all about finally truly embracing our role as citizens of the Earth, not its conquerors.
And that leaves us, you and me, with the defining question for our time. After centuries of acting like conquerors, what does it truly mean to become citizens of this planet once again?